Hey Alex, quick question for you. Do you like watching movies in groups or solo?
Both, but I prefer groups actually. So in this episode, we're talking about the movies that shaped our love of watching movies in a group. So this is Alex from Los Angeles.
And this is Karen from San Francisco. Welcome to Movies That Shaped Us. We are two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but were both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we'll cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through three of our favorite movies.
And welcome back, everyone. So you probably noticed we did take a week off, but now we are back, and we're actually back coming at you weekly. So stay tuned at the end of this episode so you can hear about our new format change. So with that out of the way, let's dive into the episode this week.
So, you already talked about the topic today,
Mm-hmm.
Alex. Do you want to get into a little bit more of why we chose this topic and how you thought about this topic?
Yeah, so one of the things that I really like about just the medium of film, that it is a social experience. Whether, you're at the theater with a bunch of people you know or you don't know, there is still something that I feel, at least I get energy off of the crowd and how they're interacting with the film. Same thing at home. Yeah, I can watch a movie by myself on my couch, but it's more fun if you have someone with you, a group of people, you're, having a little movie watching party or something. It just adds a lot to the experience. And there definitely have been movies that have shaped those experiences for me, and the different types of things I get out of those group experience. So I have three examples of that, including, the first movie that kind of inspired me to put together movie nights, essentially, where I would buy blocks of tickets with a bunch of my friends. You participated in several of these when we both lived in LA,
Mm-hmm.
where we'd, go to the movies, and, maybe 8 or 10 of us at one point for the Force Awakens. I think it was like 30 plus people, which is the largest block of tickets I've got. But I really love going to theaters, especially in a group. So one of my movies will touch on the origins of that. But yeah, I just think it's, again, a social experience, and I really enjoy the group dynamic thing. What about yourself? What do you think about group watching versus solo? And then how'd you think about the list?
Yeah, now kind of different experiences. I think the solo viewing for me is more about, you know, learning and going deeper in the movie about the filmmakers and such behind it, and
Mm-hmm.
and especially if you want to kind of analyze something, or watch something that you're not really sure about. I think watching solo is great, and I feel like I probably watch more movies solo because I had so much catching up to do, having not grown up here, and
Mm-hmm.
watching movies from the past, and I still do so much of that perhaps, versus watching movies in a group, like you said, is a totally different experience where you're not only watching the movie for yourself, but your experience is being shaped by the people that you are watching it with.
Right.
And especially when you're watching people, movies with people that you know actually. And then when you think about these movies later on, your how your friends or family or whoever reacted to those movies are very much part of the experience of the movie. Like I
Yes.
will always remember, like so and so person had this reaction to this movie,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's sort of part of the whole movie in a way, which is kind of what filmmakers often say, right? That once we've made the movie, now we've offered it to the people, it's theirs. So I
Mm-hmm.
think watching it together with people, especially people that you know, is a true form in my mind of kind of making that movie your own. It's
Yes.
harder to do that when you watch it solo. So, I thought about my list with different genres of movies because I always like to kind of bring in some diversity from that standpoint, but also movies that I watch with friends, family.
Yeah, well, great. Well, then, speaking of your list, why don't you kick us off and talk about the number three movie that shaped your love of seeing movies in a group? What do you got for us today, Karan?
All right. So my number three is Gone Girl from 2014, directed by David Fincher, written by Gillian Flynn, starring Ben Affleck, Rosamund Pike, Neil Patrick Harris, Carrie Coon, bunch of other folks, Tyler Perry. Quick log line: with his wife's disappearance having become the focus of an intense media circus, a man sees the spotlight turn on him when it's suspected that he may not be innocent. So before we kind of go in the depth of it, but this movie for me is kind of that, grown up friend experience of
Mm-hmm.
watching this movie with a friend, and just obviously it's an amazing movie and we'll get into that, but just totally flabbergasted by the reactions of other people in the theater, my friend included, and my own, and the complicated emotions and feelings that brought up. And that's why this movie will always kind of live in my mind, A, just for being an amazing Fincher film, but also just for how my friend reacted to this movie and how other people reacted, which is not how I was reacting. And we'll get to that. But curious, I'm sure you've seen this movie before, but curious of your relationship with this movie. Did you watch it with a bunch of people or alone or yeah?
Yeah, so I'd seen the film, saw it first in theaters opening weekend. I had not read the book. I didn't know anything about it. And this movie definitely has, I think, two big twists in the film, or two
Yep.
shocking moments that I was definitely gasping along with the entire rest of the theater of like, holy, at these two things. So it's and that again is something that is fun about sharing that experience. If you're home alone and you're watching it, yeah, I'm sure you can still be like, oh no, but there's something about turning to someone next to you and be like, oh my God, like that just happened, or hearing all these other people just as shocked as you are at those two moments in the film, that is just what makes it so great. And I'll never also forget seeing this film in a theater and seeing just the audience reaction to it. And yeah, as a film, I think this has only grown in my love of this film and appreciation for it the more and more times I see it. I think it's like one of Fincher's best movies. Definitely the best thing he's done in the last 10 years. It's just really just a incredibly well-crafted film and the perfect thing for his sort of sensibilities. It's just fantastic. I really, really love this movie. But I'm curious to hear about more of your your experience.
Yeah, no. So yeah, like you said, it's brilliantly mounted, brilliantly crafted across the board, as one would expect from all Fincher movies. And we're watching this movie with me and a close friend of mine, and edge of your seat, you're totally engrossed in the story. Your head is going a million miles of what's happened, what may have been happening, blah blah blah. And the first big reveal, and spoiler alert if people haven't watched this movie, with Rosamund Pike actually being alive, and that everybody gasps and everything, and we're all in kind of synchronously having that reaction across the board.
Right.
I think where things kind of really went off the rails for me was the way Neil Patrick Harris is
Yep,
killed.
that's the second moment. That's the second moment that comes out of nowhere. Yeah.
Came out of nowhere. And my friend was actually, along with a lot of other people, they were in splits, laughing out loud like crazy. And I was just completely horrified by what I just watched, but also horrified by the fact that people were laughing at this. And it was a very complicated sort of moment, at least in my own head, of kind of anger and confusion about what had happened, but also how the people were reacting to it. And that's the thing. If I'd watched this movie by myself, none of this would have happened. It only made the experience richer. But then as I watched this movie over and over again, I think that is the point. It's just so heightened and so over the top that it's okay that that actually elicits like a laugh out loud. Almost you're trying to kind of, I don't know, hide your own feelings and emotions about how ridiculous this is. And that's the only thing you can do is actually laugh out loud. I get it now, but I didn't get that in the moment because I was just so horrified by it.
Yeah, no, that moment definitely is later on in the film. She is still alive and goes back to an old boyfriend of hers who was obsessed with her.
Right.
And then she ends up kind of taking him to bed. So you think it's going to be like a love scene. And then all of a sudden, a knife comes, or a scissor or something, cuts his throat, and blood just spews everywhere, like, in Kill Bill or something. And it is because the rest of the movie is very sort of I don't want to say like realistic, but pretty grounded. It's like just sort of a psychological thriller. There's no violence or hints of it, at least at this extreme. And to see a death like that coming out of nowhere with so much blood, and the way that she is so sinister in her actions too, of like, she no regret. I'm going to kill this guy. She kills him, watches him bleed out, blood going all over her. It is, I remember the entire audience being a mix of the same reactions you were talking about, of just shock, gasps, and then laughter too, which is a reaction that people can get at over-the-top violence, gore, horror, and a lot of people laugh in horror films because you don't really know what else to do, and that's where the laughter comes from.
Right.
I can't remember, honestly, if I was more on the laugh side. I mean, definitely now I laugh when I see it, but not in the shock. Even though I know it's coming, you still sort of forget how gruesome it is. And then it does sort of come out of nowhere. And then you're also sort of laughing at her, just like, she's so bad. And she's such a manipulative villain in this. So you're kind of almost laughing at her success and how just evil this woman and twisted this woman is, that she'll just do this to this guy who, yeah, he was kind of a creep, but I don't know. It's something about seeing that is definitely something. I still laugh at that scene. It still is shocking every time I see it. I've only seen the movie maybe half a dozen times. I forget just how gory that is. That
Yeah,
scene.
and then not to mention the score, especially in that moment, those like blazing sort of horns
Oh yeah.
that kind of punctuate that whole sequence.
Mm-hmm.
It's you're reverberating with it. It's just
Mm-hmm.
so I still can't laugh at it, but at least now I you're right. I always forget that it's coming, even though I know somewhere that it is coming.
Right.
But yeah, this is like a genius movie in all departments. And I mean, we've now sort of moved past this whole whodunit TV show
Mm-hmm.
renaissance that kind of went on for many years. But I think this is the movie that kind of started it, I think. And Gillian Flynn actually has, or Gillian Flynn, I should say, she's written the Sharp Objects one. I think
Oh
that she
right.
wrote that
Yes,
Amy
that's
Adams
true.
is a sort of follow up to, to a Twisted Dark
Mm-hmm.
people and sort of societies and such. But yeah, I think this movie, that's the genius of it, is that it can be on the surface level fun, enjoyable, edge of your seat movie that is brilliantly crafted, brilliantly mounted, brilliantly acted, but then it also has a lot on its mind if you
Oh
want to
yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
go deeper. And this kind of central thesis of like who we are as people and who do we present us to be to the
Right.
people that we are in a relationship with. It's about childhood trauma and how kind of that dictates our whole life. It's about the media circus and how that kind of runs wherever there's the carrot dangling.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole apparatus of kind of police and investigative work and journalism. It's a critique on all of that stuff. But then if that wasn't enough, the cherry on the cake, I think, is the brilliant casting of Ben Affleck, where
Incredible.
this
Yeah.
is sort of a portrayal of his own life in a way. Not that he's done any of these things, but his persona of who he might be and how people see him to be and how that's kind of reflected and twisted at the same way. It's just so genius from head to toe.
Yeah, I mean, he can pull off the being sort of a smug ass,
Smarmy,
but you still kind of care about
carefree.
him. He
Yep.
can, I don't know, he's like sincere, but at the same time, he's sort of like kind of a, yeah, smug and kind of arrogant.
Yeah.
And he can walk that line, which is what's so important in the first act of the movie when you think, yeah, he was probably the killer. He's lying this whole time. He did kill his wife, because you don't really trust anything Affleck's saying.
No.
That's just his persona. You see, like,
Yeah.
maybe you're kind of trying to get one over on me a little bit with your charm, but it ends up like working in the favor of the story. And, you can draw a lot of allegories, like you said, to his real life too, in the sense of, his relationships, especially that initial one with J-Lo that he had, did very much affect his career and his personal life.
Mhm.
And in the same way that in this movie, when he's with Amy, it definitely does change, him as well. Not that I'm trying to say that J-Lo was,
Right.
bad person or anything like that. And
No,
obviously
no,
I'm
no.
very
She's
happy
great.
they're back together
Yeah.
and all that sort of thing. But that thread is very interesting. But yeah, I think your point too on how you present yourself is, that's what makes that character of Amy so fascinating, because you sort of do feel
Yeah.
bad for her. Her whole life,
Oh,
she was
definitely.
the famous woman from this child's book of like the perfect life. Her parents were
Yeah.
authors and she could never live up to that. So she kept trying
No.
to
And it's sort of a
pretend.
very loveless childhood. Like
Oh,
they've
totally.
essentially used her and used
Hmm.
her persona, and she's a very sharp, capable person, has all the attributes of somebody who would be amazing, but it shows that when you don't have this essential ingredient of love in your life,
Hmm.
it sort of haunts you. And when
Right.
you're trying to kind of portray and pretend to be or live up to the book character, I suppose, but
Yes.
also,
Right. Right.
constantly try to fill that void of love and somebody who can really match you in that sense. So,
Yeah.
and there's some truth to that, right? Like we do in the dating phase, for example, we present a certain image of who we are,
Hmm?
knowingly or unknowingly. And even if you might be in a relationship with somebody for decades or whatever, do you really fully know them? I think it asks some like
Right.
really deep questions about that.
Right, totally. I mean, do you even really know yourself? I mean, that's something
Also
that,
that.
but not that this movie talks about, but totally. And I think too, really with this movie, especially the last couple times I see it, like the ending just is probably one of the more chilling and horrifying movie endings of anything I've ever seen, where basically she traps
You're
Ben
talking about the
Affleck.
side dick, right? Just
Yeah.
to be
Well,
clear.
that is
Right.
amazing. Yeah, Ben Affleck's got it going on. Um, but that she traps him in a life that he doesn't want, in a loveless marriage. He can't get out of it, and she's basically taking the entire rest of his life away without killing him. Like, he's not dead, but essentially his
No.
future is totally dead. Like, he has no agency now over the entire rest of his life. He can't get out of this marriage that's going to now consume him. She's going to control him forever. And like, I can't think of a movie with a more horrifying an ending than that.
No.
I'd rather be killed. If I was Ben Affleck, like, just kill me at this point. Like, why are you going through this? But she can't, because she needs him, because he's part of her, perfect life she's trying to portray to
Yeah.
the world.
And
It's
weirdly,
horrifying.
maybe he needs her too. I think that's why it's for the baby, perhaps, but I think there's something a lot deeper psychologically messed up that's going on,
Mm,
because he is sort of he says it at one point, I'm just a mediocre guy. I
right,
think
right.
there's some truth there. Like, he doesn't really have a future, and what else is he going to do? Or maybe he's just too lazy. I think it'll take a lot more to kind of restart your life, and he just thinks that, okay, let's just go with it, sort of thing. I don't think he fully even understands why he stays.
Yeah, yeah, true. I mean, he does mention the baby being part of it, but I think you're right. The reason why he was probably attracted to her and the life that she was able to build for them was because, yeah, he's super mid. He's just like an average
Yeah.
guy. And because she's sort of portraying this perfect, husband and wife, perfect family, perfect marriage. Oh, great. I'll just plug myself into that. And then I can sort of, punch above my weight with
Yeah.
the life that I could never have gotten on my own, because he came from like a middle class background, didn't really have, some crazy job prospects. She comes from a ton of money with like a trust
Yeah.
fund and all these sort of things. So I'm sure that was wrapped up in the reasons why he was with her initially. And obviously their marriage deteriorated over time for various different reasons that
Right.
don't necessarily have to do with that. But I think and which is why, he ends up cheating on her and sort of,
Right.
feeling like the marriage is kind of dead. But
Yeah. What
I
about
just feel
that part?
so bad for him at the end of this movie, though. It's like, again, I'd be like, just kill me at this point. Like, I'd rather you kill me than to like drag me. I guess now he has a kid coming, so maybe he wants to be the father, which is what he did want. But yeah, this movie just is, every time I see it, I'm like, this is just so good. And we should also call out her performance as well, of just absolutely incredible. I don't think she's ever kind of topped this, but it is one of the best performances I've seen in a film in the last 10 years, because she's able to first be like the victim, and then you have to understand why she's like this way, and then turn into this
Mhm.
total evil, like crazy person, again, with that scene we were
Mhm.
mentioning earlier where she kills Neil Patrick Harris. But she has to pull off all of those things. It has to be believable, and you do believe this is the same woman, you
Yeah.
know
It's a very physical performance too.
yes, yes.
I do think, at least this time when I watched it again for this podcast, I don't know. I saw some of the 100 takes ness of Fincher in her performance, but now that I'm thinking about it, I think that's also the point, because
Mm,
she's such a rehearsed person. Like, she's mapped this out in
mm,
her mind for who knows how long, and her whole life is kind of this pretend rehearsed thing anyway, because she's trying to kind of match up to something that doesn't exist. So maybe it's sort of meta in that sense, but
right.
and it's also so cold and so calculating that maybe that's the other reason why I sort of felt that I see the 100 takes
Mm.
here, because it's just so perfectly mapped versus, but it's a great juxtaposition to Ben Affleck, who just seems like he's just, walking through this movie. He's
Right.
just being himself,
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
sort of the point, I guess. Like, she's just so meticulously planned and he isn't.
Right, 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 exactly. Yeah, just one side note on the 100 takes and the audio commentary for this movie, when Fincher's talking about the scene when Neil Patrick Harris comes back to his house before he gets killed and pulls up and gets out of the car. He specifically says, "Just so you guys all know, this only took 2 takes. So all those people that complain about me taking 100 takes, literally F you." Like, he says that on the commentary track. And I thought of you. I was like, "Oh, he's talking to Karan right now." So just know that there is a scene in this movie that was only like 2 takes. So Neil Patrick
One
Harris get out
scene.
of a car.
Great.
Yeah, just so
Thanks,
you know.
Fincher. Brilliant. Okay. What is your number three?
So my number 3 film that shaped my love of seeing movies in a group is Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace from 1999. This is a film written and directed by George Lucas, starring Ewan McGregor, Liam Neeson, Natalie Portman, and Jake Lloyd. IMDb plot summary: 2 Jedi escape a hostile blockade to find allies and come across a young boy who may bring balance to the Force, but the long dominant Sith resurface to claim their original glory. So this movie was important to me in many ways in terms of my group experience. But what this represents is why it is so fun to watch a movie for the first time with a group of people that no one has seen the film, and you all get to experience this as fans of whatever this movie is going to be together. And seeing what moments the crowd is excited about. You have your enthusiasm that is immediately shared by everyone around you. And yes, this is Star Wars, but it also could be opening night of a Fincher film with all the, the people who love David Fincher there. Or I just saw Oppenheimer recently, and all the Christopher Nolan fans. Like, you can tell that they're there in the audience. You're sort of experiencing that with them. But this movie, to me, was the very first time that I did organize a large group to go see the film. It wasn't a midnight show. I was still in high school, and this is right before I got into going to midnight movies. But it was 7 o'clock, opening night. Obviously, this was a giant phenomenon for those who might not remember or maybe weren't alive around the time. But, Star Wars had been this big thing in the 70s and 80s. And then you thought they were never going to make another movie again.
Right.
And also Star Wars really wasn't as much in the culture as it is even now. Like, I was a huge Star Wars fan growing up, but I was sort of still like the nerd kid who liked Star Wars. It wasn't so mainstream as it was now. And it wasn't like everywhere there was Star Wars everything. It was kind of a little wilderness years for a while there, especially in the 90s. So this was a big coming out for all the Star Wars fans of like, okay, now we can be back in the, in the mainstream again. And I mean, everyone was talking about this thing, news reports, the whole nine. So it was a lot of hype for this movie. Then I'll talk more about my experiences in the film and what my thoughts about it are. But I'm just curious if in India, the hype was probably still just as big. And when did you first see this movie, and did you get caught up in it at all?
Yeah, had not seen this movie until the podcast. And I don't think there was a Star Wars hype in
Interesting.
India. Or
Okay.
maybe if it was, at least not in my circles. I obviously knew of it, but that was sort of it. So
Interesting.
maybe people were camping out or, queuing up in lines the day before or the week before, which I know you did for this.
Yeah, for the second one, I camped
Second
for a
one,
week.
gotcha,
Yeah, we can
yeah.
listen to the previous episode around
Yes.
movies in a theater where I talk about
Yes.
that. Yeah.
Yes. But yeah, not really. So no, this was my first time watching this movie. And
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm curious that if you've never seen this before, just watching it by yourself on TV, like, was probably not a fun experience for you, huh?
No, not. I mean, it's not a good movie, which is no hot take.
I'll
obviously.
defend it, but anyway, keep
okay.
going.
I'm very
Yeah.
curious. But the thing with these movies is that these movies are so much bigger than the movies themselves, right? It's such a part of people's lives and growing up and all of it. So it honestly doesn't even matter if the movie lives up to the originals or what have you. Like, it doesn't matter, honestly. Like, it's much bigger than that. So if I were here and growing up with you, and if this movie came out, like, it would be the event of my life. There's no question about that. But yeah, watching it, like, the characters and a lot of it just doesn't make sense, the motivations and what have you. That said, you still get swept up in the magic of it. That's sort of what Star Wars does. Like, it takes you to a different place. It sort of pushes a different button in your mind, which is still fun and enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely the experience, again, seeing it opening night with this audience. I mean, it was a lot like,
can't even imagine.
Yeah, like, it's a religious experience. Like, I
Yeah.
was not raised in any kind of specific religion, definitely secular household, but it would be like going to a religious service. You have all the devotees there. Some people would dress up in costumes. I mean, I was not in costumes, but you get the second the opening crawl comes up, everyone just goes crazy, clapping, cheering. And this also is something, nowadays, and we've even been to several Marvel movies like this. It is
Right.
a lot more part of that movie going experience. But I never, as a kid in 1999, it was not a normal thing for people to be cheering and clapping and jumping up in a movie when you see it.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe like a Rocky Horror midnight show or something, but I never experienced anything like this before at all. And the opening crawl, people go crazy. The first time the Jedis, you see Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon, they take off their hoods. People just went nuts.
Uh,
There's a line when R2D2 sort of does something heroic in the first 10 minutes and he comes
right.
back in. They're like, oh, who is this robot? And they're like, oh, this is R2D2. And then everyone also was like, oh, it's R2. Oh my God. It's like seeing
Right.
your old friends again. And then the end, I don't know if maybe the end action sequence didn't hold up as much for you, but the final
Yeah.
sequence in the movie where there's the 4 intercutting action sequences happening at the same time, which is one level up from what they did in Jedi. So you have space battle, there's land battle, there's Queen Amidala trying to get to her throne room, and there's the Jedi fights. That whole sequence at the end just, I mean, when Darth Maul ignites that lightsaber and that second blade comes out, even though it was in the trailer, we knew it was coming. I mean, people just like the whole theater just went nuts. And again, I never experienced anything like this before. And it was hard. It's hard for me not to, every time I see this movie, not just think back to those moments
Mhm.
of like turning to my high school friends, be like, oh my God, I can't believe this just happened. Or the surprise, even didn't realize that Natalie Portman was playing 2 roles. I was stupid. I didn't
Right,
know that
right.
twist actually worked. I remember turning to a friend like, oh my God, he's like, oh shit, that was her. So those sort of things, like, looking back on it, it really was a lot of the things that I've been experiencing in the last 10 years now with, comic book movies and even Star Wars sort of taking over, for better or for worse, the film going experience. This was the beginning of that for me. And yeah, there's been moments like in Endgame and Avengers Endgame. I think that was a bigger experience for me when it came to this, but this is the first one and sort of changed my love of wanting to go to the movies in theaters, see movies with a giant group, take all my friends. I mean, this really was the genesis of that for me. And again, I will defend the film. I think it sets up it puts the chess pieces on the board that 6 films, because I don't really count the Disney films, the original 6 films, it puts all the pieces on the board that you need to sort of get to the end of that story for Anakin and then the entire Skywalker family, and what happens to the Empire when they take over, when they get overthrown. So I still actually think this movie holds up really well, and I like it the more times I see it, and it's gone through a little bit of renaissance in the last 6 or 7 years. Like a lot of the really young kids who saw it at the time really loved it, and folks more my age, like teenagers in their 20s, really poo-pooed it, and the movie was kind of crapped on for a really long time. And I do now think it's being given the respect it deserves by the younger generation, kind of saving the respect for this film. But yeah, very different experience than you seeing this just on your couch. But
I know.
one day we'll have to do a whole Star Wars marathon sometime. I can sit next to you and
Yeah.
recreate some of those experiences.
I was just thinking that,
Yeah.
this is probably one of the things that it'll be in the top 3 things that I sort of missed, I think, growing up here, that I just could never really truly experience the lore and the fandom and the sort of the religion of Star Wars. Like, I just know from a distance how important it is, how much it means to people, but also just to the cinematic evolution of times. I feel like I kind of missed it.
Yeah, it was. I was just about a month ago, actually. John Williams, who's the composer, which again, actually, this score is unbelievable. The Duel of the Fates is still like, I remember getting the soundtrack and listening to it forever in my car. But I was just at a John Williams concert. He played the Hollywood Bowl about a month ago, and whenever the Star Wars songs would come on, like everyone would pull out their lightsabers and sort of like.
I saw that concert too a little before you. Yeah,
it is kind of awe inspiring of like, wow, they really did, this franchise and these movies and obviously the music too, just touch so many people in a way that just seeing that expression is cool, and it definitely mirrored what it's like in a theater when you're seeing one of these. Especially this movie too, the first one in 15 years or whatever since that other Star Wars Return of the Jedi came out, a movie we never thought they would ever make, episode 1. So again, very different times now where Star Wars has sort of lost its magic. There's too much Star Wars. It's not special anymore. But every time I see this movie, I go back to that time and just remember again that experience with my friends, and all the strangers in the audience too, that again, after leaving the theater, everyone was like, this is the best thing we've ever seen. And it wasn't until I think later, some of the folks, kind of, it wore off on them. But I'm glad you saw it.
And that's the thing, right? It doesn't matter, actually.
Right.
I mean, the movie is probably good. And like you said, it's regaining its kind of popularity and what have you. But it doesn't matter, actually. It's more about the shared experience. And the surprise aspect, maybe that's another interesting point that you made, that now we know because people have already announced the 10 next movies that are coming out.
Right.
We live in that kind of a world where there's just so much information and there's something kind of of fun and cool about just not knowing that they're going to make this again, and then they do make it, and it's the biggest event of your life.
Totally. Yeah. And also, I think just again, in watching this now, the sort of Easter eggs and fan call out moments in this film feel very organic and natural. Whereas now you'll watch some of these later Marvel movies where it's like, insert, they have a little pause in the film because they know people will be cheering, and it just feels very inauthentic. Where can we place the Easter eggs to get people crazy? That's not how George Lucas really ever thought about these things. Everything is organic to the story. And yeah, you do have those applause moments, like when R2 is the way they say his name for the first time, but it wasn't built around that moment being important. It's like, okay, here's R2, and we're not going to wait 5 minutes where everyone goes crazy in the theater. So it's like, it's a more innocent time. In like geek filmmaking of just like, we're not really spoon feeding anything to you guys anymore, which I think unfortunately the Marvel franchise has sort of ended in that place where now everything has to just be spoon fed to the audience, like,
and connected to the million things that have come before and after and what have you.
Right.
The real word is innocence. I always, even though I was not part of Star Wars lore and such, whenever I watch a Star Wars movie, I always get that feeling that it's child play. There's something innocent about this, the way it's constructed. It's just so purely creative from everybody, obviously from Lucas at the helm. So yeah, makes sense.
Okay, so leaving A Galaxy Far, Far Away, Karan, what is your number 2 film that shaped your love of seeing movies in a group?
All right. So my number 2 is Terminator 2 Judgment Day from 1991, directed by the one and only Jim Cameron, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton, Edward Furlong. Quick logline: a cyborg identical to one who failed to kill Sarah Connor must now protect her 10-year-old son John from an even more advanced and powerful cyborg. As if anybody has not seen this movie.
Right.
Oh well. But this movie is, to me, that childhood movie magic memory of watching with a bunch of friends. And I'll set the scene. So I think I mentioned on the podcast, but my dad was in the army, so we moved around quite a bit. And often, the army in India, and I guess most places, has a pretty big sort of party culture, not sort of like party in the sense like people getting wasted or what have you, but more like social gatherings and such. So that sort of thing. So we would get invited to people's homes, and at this point, I don't know if you were watching at my place, like, English VHS tapes and such, like new movies that came out. We were watching a lot of classics like Disney movies and things. So me and my sister, we both had some friend's place, my parents' friend's place. And while the adults were hanging out outside, we were all in the bedroom, the kids' bedroom, watching on a little TV in their bedroom a VHS tape of this movie. And I don't think I'd even seen the first one. And we just couldn't believe what we were watching. It was just one of those transcendent experiences, and kind of what defined Hollywood to me, what defined movie magic to me. So yeah, this is kind of that unbeatable memory of just watching a movie in a little bedroom on a tiny, horrible TV and being totally transfixed by the movie, but also just the shared experience as, little kids watching something and just being totally blown out of their minds. What is your relationship and memory of watching this movie the first time?
Yeah. So just the question, like, how old do you think you were in that time?
I want to say like 8, 9 years old or something like that. Yeah.
So like right when it sort of had first come out then.
Right.
Yeah. For me, it's very similar with this film too. Like I was around that age, like 9, maybe 10. So I did not see this in the theater. And I do think the thing that makes this movie so interesting to me is it's an R-rated movie for kids, honestly.
Yeah.
Like it's rated R, but this is a movie for kids. But it was very similar to your experience of this was a consistent sleepover movie. From that age all the way up through high school. And if I'm over at some friend's house, especially like, in grade school for sleepovers, you'd have T2 would be right in there on the VHS tape in the rotation. So there's a lot of watching it with groups of my friends. Also, my sisters and I both loved this movie growing up too. So there's a lot of memories I have too of watching this again on television and then later on DVD or on VHS and then DVD of watching this movie just with my sisters. It's just an endlessly entertaining film that I just appreciate it more and more the older I get in terms of what it was able to pull off. I think it's James Cameron's my favorite movie of his, and arguably potentially his best movie too. It's just so note perfect all around. But it is so interesting that this is a hard R, very
Mm-hmm.
violent. There's some language and stuff in that too. But I think that putting the main character of John Connor, at least, as like an age of like 12, 13, and he is very annoying
And
and
a bad
bratty.
actor.
I don't know. I think Furlong is great in
Jim's
what he's trying to
string
do
of
here.
casting not the best children in his movies,
I'll
I
push
think.
back, and I thought Newt was good in Aliens, but anyway, what's interesting about this is as a 8 and 10 year old, you look up to like 13
Yeah.
year olds, even when they were kind of lame and annoying, like John Connor kind of is, you still think that they're cool, and it's a way for you as a kid to feel like you're part of
Yeah.
the movie because there's a little kid basically in the movie as the main character getting dragged around by Arnold and in the action. I mean, you're never really feeling like he's in danger per se. It's not like, oh no, like if I was
It's
there, I'd
close
be
enough,
killed.
but never too much.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just a brilliantly I don't know if that was the initial conceit of we're going to make like a kid version of a movie of the Terminator for kids. Because the first Terminator, which much like you, I had not seen when I saw this one,
It's
is
quite dark.
much more serious,
Dark. Yeah.
darker, great film too. Like
Oh
just
yeah.
an insanely good film. But this movie has a more sense of fun and energy to it that I think Arnold also brings that as well as the good guy, as opposed to
Definitely.
playing the bad guy. That, Arnold is just an kids love Arnold. We can talk endlessly about Arnold, and I will as a teaser for something we'll announce at the end of this episode. But he was always one of my favorite actors growing up. I was obsessed with him, and this was a lot of the reason why, like him in this movie in particular. It's just so great. But it's just funny, yeah. Both of us were like 8 or 9
Yeah.
watching an R-rated action movie, like basically like sleepovers and like group gatherings. Hey, that's Jim Cameron for you, I guess.
I know, pretty great. Yeah, I agree with both of those points that you made, but I think my memory of this movie having that kind of impact on me and the
Mm-hmm.
friends and my sister that we watched together with was actually the T100.
Or T one
Those
thousand, T one
T1000,
thousand.
sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Those scenes of like the phone scene and
Oh yeah.
then, all those metal drops combining and him sort of vanishing in the floor, like it was that stuff that kind of really, like, our jaws were on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how is this happening? And spoiler alert, it still holds up. Like,
It
all of
does.
that stuff works so well. Like, this is all practically mounted, and the CGI looks, whatever they did looks so incredible. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think it was that movie magic feeling. But you're right. I think the kid being at the center of the film, Arnold being so endearing, and also, it has sort of the classic movie tropes, right? Of we're going to walk with somebody who's not from this world
Right.
and see
Right.
how they learn, how they fumble. And in this case, it's the kid who's leading that. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's very endearing and funny and very well done. And then the propulsive action, I think, is something that, even though it's dark and violent, there's something really fun about it. Like, you sort
Mm-hmm.
of, and the bad guy is so good at what he does, like the way he runs and all of it, that he's a great match for Arnold. And I think you're, as kids, like, you're kind of flipping your minds between whose team are you on, even though you don't recognize or understand the consequences of what
Yeah.
any of this means, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
but you just rooting for whoever is the most impressive. So that was the other thing. I think we as kids, we were like rooting for this guy or the other guy, and we were obviously changing our allegiances as the movie went on. And I think that's pretty fun too. Then you're part of it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's interesting too how, I think this is arguably one of the best sequels of all time too. And
Mhm.
what Cameron is so good at sequels, but then especially with this film, was essentially the same plot of the first movie. Like the basic nuts and bolts of it are all still there. So you have the familiarity, you sort of know what it is going to be, but he adds in enough twists and interesting things in it that are different and new. And one of those is definitely the T1000 played by Robert Patrick, where you might think Arnold needs to go up to someone against someone who's bigger than him because he's so big. But no, like Robert Patrick is slender, he's athletic build versus like bodybuilder, but he has more of the tech. So he's
And
smaller
faster.
physically, but he has more technology. And how is Arnold, who's like the more outdated T800 model? It's like, okay, well, he's going up against someone who's looks smaller, but actually is more capable. So that's what makes it
Right.
interesting throughout the whole movie of like, wow, it actually looks like a real threat to this guy who in the first movie, as Arnold in Terminator 1, he was unstoppable. Nothing could stop
Right.
him. And now there is something that can stop him, and it's this smaller guy. So it makes it fun and interesting. And there is sort of a humor that Robert Patrick puts into that character too.
Yeah.
I mean, he does some icy cold kills and things, but there's a little bit of like a charm to him sometimes. I love the scene when he's like wagging his finger at John at the end and just joking around with the kids a little bit in the beginning, trying to find John in the mall. He insanely good performance by Robert Patrick in this thing. And then also Linda Hamilton, the transformation that her character goes through and the physical transformation Linda Hamilton undergoes in this movie, just looking so tough and buff and, hardened after all those, what she experienced in the first one. Just an incredible performance. I mean, everyone in this movie, I still like Edward Furlong. I think for what he does in this role, he actually does a really, really good job as John Connor, being the right amount of annoying.
Yeah, and it's off its time too, right? Like, I think this is
yes.
how we looked at, or we wanted cool kids to be like in the movies, like the way he talks and his whole vibe and his hair and everything.
Well, again, the interesting thing about John is, like, as I remember as kids, we always thought he was annoying. Like this guy sucks. Like, we could be cooler than him. Why aren't we in this movie? And I think that helps because it's like he's almost like the version of what an adult would think a kid would think was cool at the time. But if you're a kid, you're like, oh, that he's kind of lame, actually. But I think that's what helps because then you feel more invested in like, oh, I could be in this movie than if I could be the kid. I'm better than that kid. I could be there and Arnold could be helping me. Because we always thought he was annoying. I don't know. But again, I think the performance again that he gives is great. And yeah, the movie just like, about a lot of different things, whole allegory on fatherhood and Arnold being, the surrogate father that John never had. You touched on the fish out of water stuff, which works so well in here, where Arnold doesn't know how to interact with the humans and John's teaching him.
Yeah.
And I also love how this movie takes because the theme of the first one was basically about like the future set. You have to deal with the fate that's coming. And the amazing shot at the end of Terminator 1 where she's driving off into a storm because like a storm is coming. It's a future that you cannot stop, which is a depressing kind of feeling. And then this movie is about the future is what you make it. And the very last scene is just a road driving into you don't know where, but you're in the car. Like it's a POV shot. So that means you get to define your own future. I think it's a more uplifting message in this film of, you know what, fate is not set. You can do whatever you want. Sarah and John, they changed the future by defeating the T-1000 and who knows what the future will hold. And I think that's a more positive message. And that's what I love about how they can flip that from the first one, which ended so negatively.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would agree. I think this is, Jim Cameron's best movie in my mind too. Probably, if not the best in the top, action movies ever made.
Oh yeah, easily.
Not just for its time, but for any time. It's sort of timeless. And you're right. I think it's something about the tonality of it. Like it's fun and propulsive and winking at you, but also handling some serious things, but then is mounted on these amazing effects and amazing action sequences. The pacing of the movie is incredible. And I think that's what his superpower is. We've talked in our past episodes about the Avatar movies and such. Though they are brilliant spectacles and technical achievements, I think what is his not strongest suit is when he gets a little too serious about larger, heavier themes, and then they have to be portrayed in dialogue and human emotionality. Like that's not his thing. And I think this movie just has the right amount of that he can handle and do it very deftly. And it doesn't take over. The movie knows what it is. Like this is a fun movie.
Right.
And and that's, I think that's where he really excels. Like that's where the Terminator movies, even True Lies, just absolutely amazing. I think I love this era of his. Sarah Connor, I agree. Linda Hamilton, I should say, great physical transformation. The acting on watching it this time is definitely a bit of a heat check of like, I'm going to be at, at 15 at all times, or not all times, but like a lot of times. So there's a little bit of that I was sort of feeling this time that, okay, can we just reduce your volume just a little bit? Like that would be nice. But I mean, what am I even? No, it's really, to be honest, like this is such a great movie. And
I agree.
Like I said, an intro to Hollywood. Making.
I could definitely see that, especially of that, like the 90s. This is really like the birth of 90s filmmaking. I think you can put it a lot on the shoulders of this film, especially like you mentioned the VFX, brilliant combination of cutting edge CGI, Stan Winston's practical effects just off the chain, and some very basic things like, hey, Linda Hamilton has a twin. Let's use her twin sister in this scene where it's supposed to be two of her. Okay.
Right.
The same thing with the security guard who gets killed in
Right.
the hospital. Twins. So they're using like
Yeah.
old school Hollywood tricks, the best practical effects you've ever seen, and the introduction of CGI in the perfect balance of all three of those, which is, I think, really the way you should be using CGI, is like one of the
Exactly.
many things in your toolkit instead of everything just being CGI, which is another reason why, Jurassic Park, the dinosaurs looked the best in the first movie,
Yeah.
because it was a combination of practical effects and CGI,
Right.
and not
Same,
just
same
full
for same
CGI
thing.
dinosaurs.
Exactly. And then you add brilliant cinematography, great score,
I love the score in this
iconic,
movie.
absolutely.
Yeah.
You can hear like two notes of that score and you know exactly what this is.
Mm-hmm.
And then on this rewatch, quite relevant actually with the whole AI stuff. And
Yeah.
I actually like the dialogue writing for once because it's not overly drawn out. The exposition is very contained. Yeah, this thing learns and what have you. It's sort of delving into what we are living in today in a
Right.
very interesting way. So
I mean, it's a perfect movie. Cameron is one of the few directors that has a handful of movies that I would consider perfect in every way, and this is definitely one of them. And we'll talk more later about Arnold in this movie. I think this is also the perfect use of who he is, and
best use of his. It's a
made
great
me fall in love
performance, actually.
with him.
Yeah.
It's an incredible performance, and one of his best, I think, actually, what he's able to pull off. A lot more complicated than in Terminator 1, where you just had to look like a steely-eyed killer. And this one, he's doing so many different things and evolves and changes over the course of the film. And it is an incredibly sad moment at the end when he has to
Oh
kill
yeah,
himself. And
I teared up.
oh, me too. It's
Yeah.
so sad. And John's saying no, no, and he just gives that awesome
Mhm.
like thumbs up as he goes into
Mhm.
the. It's just perfect movie. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely
So
perfect
good.
movie.
All right. What is your number two?
So my number two film that shaped my love of movies watching in a group is The Big Lebowski from 1998. This is written and directed by the Coen brothers, starring Jeff Bridges, John Goodman, and Julianne Moore. The IMDb plot summary: ultimate LA slacker Jeff the Dude Lebowski, mistaken for a millionaire of the same name, seeks restitution for a rug ruined by debt collectors, enlisting his bowling buddies for help while trying to find the millionaire's missing wife.
Stone Cold classics, one after the other.
I
Really.
know, really. Yeah, yeah, for sure. This movie for me, and why I put it on here, is a representation of the type of movie where you watch it in a group because you've seen it 1,000 times, you and everyone in the group, and it's about quoting the movie as it goes through, being like, oh, I can't wait till this scene kind of comes up, knowing where the laugh moments are. Very different from, the experience I was talking about with Star Wars is first time you see it, you don't know what's coming. This is, you literally memorize the script of the film, and that's why it's more fun because you can quote it to other people in the room and talk
Mhm.
about your favorite moments and talk over certain parts because everyone's seen it a billion times. It's just a really fun thing that I love to rewatch movies with my close friends. Yeah, so pause there. What are your thoughts on The Big Lebowski?
Yeah, so sadly, I'd actually never watched this movie before. And I'd obviously always heard
Oh
about,
man,
I know,
I wish I was there to watch this with you. It was so
I
much
know,
fun.
I know, so much fun. I mean, I totally see it why this would be such a perennial rewatchable, especially for like our generation or
Oh
maybe
yeah.
even generation above us. I just didn't see it when it came out. And then, because of the reputation this movie gained, that it's kind of a stoner classic, it's a very dude movie,
Mm-hmm.
and such
Literally
like
a
literally
dude.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or El Duderino, if you want to say. I love that line.
That's incredible.
Uh,
Yeah.
but that sort of put me at a distance from it that I was like, oh, I don't know. But
Mm-hmm.
and then as it always happens with all Coen brother movies, that I always admire them, and that admiration sometimes keeps me at a distance from them. But then when I watch it, I'm totally blown away by what they've accomplished. And I think this might be one of their best.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's all the things that they're so good at, where you don't even know if what the plot is per se, or what the story is, because it feels so organic. It's being
Mm-hmm.
written as it's being told, but then the time and the characters and everything is just so perfectly drawn out, pitch perfectly written
Mm-hmm.
movie from like a dialogue standpoint.
Oh
And
yeah.
then you also have the technical craft, and then probably some iconic performances. Like, I mean, we'll get to Jeff Bridges, and John Goodman, like the
Oh my
two of
God.
them, it's just and Philip Seymour
Oh,
Hoffman
it's
as
Phil
well. Like
Seymour. He's so
it's
funny.
unbelievable. Jeff Bridges, we all have different relationships with him, but I think the way we know him as now, it's because of this movie.
Mm.
This is
Hmm.
no hot take, but
Right, right.
kind of this loosey goosey, kind of fun kind of guy who's maybe dopey, but also very smart, but soulful. Like, I feel like all of that, it's almost like Big Lebowski kind of became his persona after this
Yeah,
movie
yeah.
for real.
Or this was what he was like
Or
the
this
whole
was he
time.
always
Who
was.
knows?
Who
Yeah.
knows? Exactly.
Just sort of
Yeah.
like,
But
yeah.
it's just so great and so funny. And yeah, I'm so glad I finally watched this and I get it why this would be such a rewatchable.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, like this movie is one of the most like complicated and nuanced movies in terms of it's about a thousand things. Like we
Right.
talked about The Matrix recently. I think that's another movie where you can analyze it from a billion different levels.
Right.
This movie too, like the more I've seen it, sort of new layers of it and themes and what it's actually about kind of opens up. But I've seen this tons of different times. Again, in college, this would be a movie you walk into someone's dorm room, 9 times out of 10, it's either this that's playing or Gladiator. It's like just always on the background. And also, I went to there was Lebowski festivals that happen
Oh,
around
wow.
the country, and I think actually around the world, where it's like a whole week of people that just love the movie, and then at the end of it, they end with a screening. And I went to just the screening portion of it in LA, and people were in costumes, like everyone in bathrobes, dressed up like the dude and all their favorite characters, and tons of white Russians being served. I
I
had
was
like
just gonna
three of
say
them.
Kaluuya's everywhere.
Exactly, three of them during the movie, and that is like similar to the Star Wars experience, but here it's like people literally yelling out the lines as they say them. You're out of your element, Donnie. You're out of your element. Or like, where's the money, Lebowski? Like, oh, this is insanely quotable movie, right? And everyone just there, just like loving this thing and re-experiencing it. It just makes it fun. But it was interesting actually on this rewatch. I sort of identified with like the dude
Mhm.
philosophy for the first time. Like there's also, I should mention too, like there's a religion that formed around this movie called Dudism, where they
Oh,
follow
wow.
where they follow the tenets of what the dude
Goodness.
lives by. And I always thought that was kind of silly. And then for some reason this watch, maybe it's just the age I'm in or something, I'm like, yeah, like that guy has it going on. He just, the famous quote at the end, the dude abides. It's like, look, just let people be whatever they want to do. You sort of stay in your lane, just enjoy your life, not overthink anything. But there is a line you draw, like he says, this aggression will not stand, man. When they take his
Mhm.
rug and they won't get, you don't let everyone walk over you all the time. But you kind of just go through life, be like, look, like I don't know, like I'm just trying to do my thing. Like, why are you bothering me?
Yeah.
And now I kind of get it. I don't know. I'm like, yeah, like maybe that does make you happier. I mean, honestly, everyone in the movie, and one of the themes that I pick up on in this film, I think, is it's different versions of like American masculinity that he
Right.
sort of runs into. And there's different, there's like the cop who's like reactionary. There's the executive, the actual Lebowski who's like the rich sort of version of what masculinity could be. And he's the only one that seems happy in the entire movie.
Right.
And he solves the case eventually and sort of seems like he's living an okay life. Like, so, hey, maybe you should just sort of abide all the time. It's just, I don't know. It landed on me in a weird way. I'm like, yeah, because before I always thought, oh, he's kind of a slacker guy and he's sort of a loser. And yeah, he's unemployed. And I don't know. I didn't identify with him or feel like I was supposed to. And now I'm like, damn, like maybe I should look at the dudism and join that religion. I don't know. It was like converting me over to it.
Yeah. No, both is true, right? Like, I think he definitely represents the generation of people who probably had it at one point, but then things never really worked out. And then they
Mm-hmm.
just were like, you know what? Just screw it all. I'm just gonna just do my thing.
Yeah.
But then
Right.
in the process of that, they probably discovered some sense of happiness as well. So I guess both are true. He is kind of a loser, but
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
love about him is that A, he's happy, B, there's no judgment. Like he meets all
No.
these crazy characters. Not once do you see him, judge anybody for who they are, what they do.
Mm-hmm.
Julianne Moore's character and all these people, what are they up to? Like he never asks anything, which is kind of really amazing and quite relevant in a true way. Like we talk a lot about in our culture about kind of being open-minded and such, but
Mm-hmm.
often I feel like that comes with like a big heavy dose of baggage of like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
you're still all wrong. There's so much judgment and kind of, even though you're sort of standing for what's quote unquote right and supposed to be more open-minded, but often you're just leading with hate
Right.
versus this guy truly is open-minded
Yeah.
and leads with kindness, actually.
Right.
And
Again,
I don't know if that kindness comes from the fact that he's high perpetually
maybe.
or something else.
No, but I think it's a really, again, maybe it's just the age that I'm at now, but I felt him to be a really admirable kind of guy. And his take on life was, kind of live and let live, abide by things. Yeah. People, the nihilists, they have a point of view. Okay.
Right.
Okay. These guys, Jackie Treehorn, some crazy gangster guy, but okay. Like, I'm just going to kind of go with it. I don't want to bother anyone. I just want to get my originally get, my rug, the rug replaced, and then figure out how I can get out of this whole
Because it
mess.
ties the room well
It
together.
ties the room together. Yeah. No, it's incredible. But I think again that theme of it, of his sort of life philosophy, you're right. It's leading from sort of like acceptance and that, look, live and let live up to a point. Because again, at some point he's like, no, I want my freaking rug back. This is not, I want my rug back. And he
He
steals
won't
it
be
from
walked
Big
all
Lebowski.
over.
He won't be walked over, right? So there is a subtle difference there versus Donnie, who's Steve Buscemi, who's incredible performance, who just always gets just consistently.
Yeah.
Him and John Goodman, just the incredible, like the dialogue between the two of them is just amazing. Like, you're out of your element, Donnie. You're out of your element. And he just goes yelling at him and crapping all over him all the time. He just is nonstop hilarious. And then, of course, the big moment too in Lebowski Fest, everyone goes crazy, is when Jesus shows up at the bowling alley and they play that awesome Hotel California bit, and he's there, and John Turturro has that great line about not effing with the Jesus, and
right.
And also I want to call out too Roger Deakins, who shot this movie.
Yeah.
Incredible cinematography in this, and one of my favorite shots is actually when they do the Jesus sequence and the camera's sort of panning over the three friends, the dude and his two bowling buddies, just in their little reactions, and the shots of the camera inside of the bowling ball rolling down the alley. Very just cool. Ingenious stuff. I mean, I think this is some of Deakins' best work, honestly.
And even though it's sort of hard to kind of like Blade Runner, the new one, and this movie couldn't be more far apart.
Right.
And it's been done by the same people, but you see the greatness of this person,
Totally.
Right across. Yeah. No. Super fun movie. I'm so glad I watched it. John Goodman, my gosh, like he should be an Oscar winner for this movie, I think.
Oh yeah. For sure. Well, the interesting thing was, at the time, this came out right after Fargo, which Fargo was a huge critical hit and box office hit. And this movie wasn't. It flopped with both critics and the box office. And now I think if you were to ask somebody on the street, have you heard of Fargo or heard of Big Lebowski? People are going to heard of Big Lebowski way more than Fargo. I mean, I love Fargo, and I think it's actually they're a better movie, and I love it. But I think the Big Lebowski's honestly just stood up the test of time more because of just whatever it is. Like, it's hard to kind of even describe the vibe of this film without watching it. And it's very unique, and it's kind of about nothing, but about everything. And I think this movie is the thing that will be, in 100 years, the Coens will be remembered maybe just for this or mainly for this. I mean, this movie, I think, will stand the test of time.
I think so too.
I think we're at year number one.
Okay. So my number one movie that shaped my love of watching films in a group is Father of the Bride, 1991. It's interesting I have so many 90s movies. I typically
we're children of the 90s. Let's just
I know,
own it.
But
we're
always
old, so
try to bring some diversity from like different times of my life, but this just happens to be what it is. But so directed by Charles Schreier, written by Nancy Myers, starring Steve Martin, Diane Keaton, Martin Short. Quick logline: with his oldest daughter's wedding approaching, a father finds himself reluctant to let her go. So, like I said upfront, like this movie to me is the representation of kind of the family classic viewing experience of all four of us, my sister, my parents, watching a movie and just totally connecting with it. And in a weird way, and in a very heightened way, seeing your own home and the characters of your own home being reflected on screen in some form or the other, and the laughter and the tears that brings. This is what this movie is to me. So, but curious if you'd watched it. I'm sure you have, but what's your relationship with this movie?
Yeah, very similar to yours, actually. This was like a family movie night. This was on a lot, and that's my main associations with it. I actually I've seen it a bunch as a kid and hadn't seen it in probably like 15 or 20 years for this rewatch. But I definitely, in rewatching it, would just, think back to all those nights when just as a family we just rent Father of the Bride from the video store and watch it as a family. This definitely is a family movie for sure.
Yeah. What did you think of it watching it this time?
it was interesting. Like, first of all, it was definitely very dated in the sense of he runs a shoe company where they do
Right.
manufacturing in the United States. I was like, oh yeah, we did used to make things here. This is so odd. Like, what a movie that they could never make nowadays. But I guess again, because I'm older, I started paying more attention to his, like, Steve Martin's
Right.
character, focusing on him more. I mean, yeah, he's the main character in the movie, but as a kid, I guess I wasn't as he's a middle-aged man. I'm a middle-aged man now. I mean, I don't have kids or I don't have a daughter who's about to get married, but I was focused a lot more on him. And it was just interesting seeing him being, the classic Steve Martin thing of what he can pull off. Like, he's a total self-centered jerk, but you still sort of like connect with him because he's Steve Martin. It's like he can walk that very fine line, similar to
Yeah.
what we were mentioning with Ben Affleck earlier. You can kind of be two things, but you still feel some affection towards him just because he is Steve Martin. And this is definitely a perfect case for his on-screen
Right.
persona. This is exactly that. I will say, like, I feel like he was a little more mean than I remembered. And he doesn't really get his comeuppance in the film. And I sort of felt like, well, what did he really learn in this? It was the ending seemed kind of rushed to me this time. Like, I didn't think he had some big emotional scene, like learning experience with his daughter. His daughter just goes off and now is happily married, going on the honeymoon. And I don't really think he changed much as a person, which I thought, I remembered him sort of like learning something, and now I'm like, maybe he didn't really learn anything. But that was sort of my experience this time, of like kind of questioning, like, what was like, he was too mean, and he didn't really seem to learn his lesson in the end about what really mattered to him, which was, his family. But I don't know,
Mm.
how have you seen this often since as a kid? You watched
Yeah.
this a lot?
I would say so, like every few years. And I always centered on him, even watching it as a kid or as a teenager or something, because
Mm-hmm.
I think he has qualities of my dad, of course, in like a very heightened way. Like my
Right,
dad
right.
can be, or I guess all dads can be like, I know best and this is my way or the
Yes.
highway.
Yeah.
And then the kids rebel. But in the end of the day, the parent or the dad was sort of right. And
Yeah.
you realize that you're
Yeah.
actually silly and you don't really know much, but your father loves you and hugs you and sort of goes along with whatever your charade is of the day or the week anyway, right? Like
Right,
that to
right.
me is the whole crux of the movie. It's so funny, even though the title is bride, there's bride in the title. To me, it was never about the wedding. Like you can sort of replace the wedding with anything that I want to buy so and so item, or
Mm-hmm.
I want to go on a certain trip, or it could be anything. And I think that's the genius of the writing of the movie, is that it doesn't matter what the plot is. What I just said earlier, that is the crux of it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how the love that you have between parents and children is sort of all bound together. The learning, I think, is on all sides. Like I think she realizes like how she like the daughter is like, oh, I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to marry him because he didn't give me the right gift and what have you.
Right, right, right.
And I think in that's a very critical scene, because you see both of them learning. Like Steve Martin gets to see the son-in-law to be for who he is and what a great partner he's going to be. And he
Right.
realizes that I'm an overreactor, so is my daughter. We come from a long lineage of overreactors. And it dawns on him that this guy is actually like Diane Keaton, like somebody who balances him. Like this guy's going to balance my daughter. And that's the learning, I think.
Hmm.
And there's learning for the daughter too, that you can't just be overreacting and being silly about things that don't matter. And I think that to me is the learning. Then after that, yeah, I think the fact that he totally misses out on all the key experiences of his daughter's wedding, there's something there, right? Like on one hand, he's holding the whole thing with his own bare hands so that it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
fall apart. The
Right,
parking and
right.
this and that, but he also misses out the whole thing. And I don't know if I can articulate that feeling in words, but it always rings very emotionally with me that that's the sacrifice that parents make,
Hmm.
And even though he wanted none of this shenanigans, let alone the wedding itself, the fact that he totally surrenders to it, and without him, the wedding wouldn't happen. Actually, it'll fall apart in the end, I
I,
think.
I think I give Franck a lot more credit than you do. Maybe I think he would
Oh
have pulled it
no,
off.
I don't think so. It would
I
have been a
trust Franck.
disaster.
Oh, come on.
It
Don't
would
don't
have been
diss
a
Franck. He's
disaster.
my favorite character in the movie. Martin Short does an incredible job, but I almost feel like what Steve Martin's character goes through in this is like he's putting him on himself, because he can't help but think that he needs to be doing all these things, but in actuality, I don't think he actually does. And he could have just unplugged and everything would have been fine. But because of his neuroses of like, no, no,
There's
no, no,
that too,
dad
but I
knows
think
best,
he,
which is relatable. Like, I'm not saying it's not
yeah,
relatable, but
I
I
think
was
he
hoping
does
that
it
there'd be
because he
some.
cares, and he has that moment before that. Okay, these two make sense together, and
Right, right, right.
my daughter's happiness does matter the most, and he wants to do it too. Although I agree he can't help himself
Right.
either.
It's like not what she wants necessarily. I would think she would want her father to attend her wedding instead of make sure everything's perfect. It was like he was doing it more for himself, I felt, than it was
Yeah, he's doing it
for
for
what she
her.
wants.
And I
Right.
think the other learning is that he is not overreacting at the phone call. He's like, have fun,
Oh, right.
go
At
be
the
you.
end.
Like that
Right,
is the
right, right.
learning. And see, that's the thing for a movie that's so heightened and kind of cheesy. I don't think it needs to then underline that, oh, we've learned everything. Like there's no epic monologue at the end between him and his wife. Like it's pretty grounded. And that's what I love about it, I think.
Yeah, that on this watch, that was missing to me. Like I needed that moment of him like
Mm.
getting punished for his like misbehavior, which yeah, he went to jail and obviously some stuff happens to him, but I wanted some sort of punishment and then into resolution in the story that I don't know. I remembered that being there, which is weird. I was like, I remember this movie ending a little bit differently, but again, I never, I think, just focused so much on his character before, which he does play a neurotic dad incredibly well. Like, I think that is
Oh, yeah.
the all the performances where he plays like a neurotic dad, which is sort of like his career after this movie because it was such a giant hit. He
Oh,
just
it's
does
so
that.
good.
He does that so well. I just wanted some kind of like comeuppance for him, and then
Yeah.
a moment of like, oh, okay, maybe I should be there because my daughter wants me
I
to be at the
disagree
wedding.
totally. If anything, now that I'm grown up, I'm like, yeah, you are 22. You should not be getting married.
Oh, I don't mean
This is
about that. Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah,
If
no, that is true. I think he was in the right to be like, well, hold on a second. Like, you just met this guy. Like, I'm more
mm,
talking about the end of the movie with the wedding scene of, yeah, she wanted him to be there and he wasn't because he was thinking he knew best about fixing everything else and no one else could do it. But
I
Franck could have done
disagree.
it. I
I
trust Franck.
disagree.
He
I
he knew what he
disagree.
was doing.
I disagree.
You gotta love the Martin Short performance though. I mean, I think this is one of
Oh,
his
it's very
best.
good. Although
Yeah.
the thing with that performance is that once you've seen it a few times, I think it loses its shine to me.
Mm,
Is to me what lives up is everything else. And two quick shout outs to Dan Keaton. Doesn't have much
yeah,
to do in the
she's
movie,
great.
but I think she looks radiant and amazing. And it's in on this watch it dawned on me how critical it is to see that she's actually the center of warmth, calmness,
Hmm.
nurturing, and balance in this house. Like these kids, they don't grow up. The daughter don't doesn't grow up to be accomplished, smart, driven, but also kind and everything, and find a good guy for herself if it's not
Hmm.
for both the parents. And I think that representation is very important. Like just the way the two Dan Keaton and Steve Martin balance each other out
Oh yeah,
as
yeah.
a couple, they do the same thing for the kids and for the entire home as well.
Hmm.
And then the second is Nancy Myers, who, all this looks very easy, but it's very difficult to make something that is sort of cheesy and lighthearted feel effortless.
Hmm.
Create a home and a family setting that is warm and inviting. Like this is the special effects of this movie. We just
Right.
talked about Terminator and everything. Like this is the special effects of this movie, which is this beautiful, warm, believable space that you want to be a part of, which is sort of her trademark, her genius. So go Nancy Myers is what
Yeah,
I
I think
have
this
to
is her best
say.
movie for me at least. It's a
Yeah.
classic. I've never seen the original one. I don't know. Have you ever seen that one, the Spencer
No,
Tracy
the
one?
one from Tracy, no, I
Yeah, yeah,
haven't.
yeah. And there's actually a remake that just came out last year, I think, that I also
Mm-hmm.
have not seen.
Andy
This,
Garcia, yeah, I didn't
yeah,
see the
did
movie.
not
Yeah.
see that one. But this one still, again, holds up as I think just interesting too. That much like Terminator 2, my experience with this of just the family getting together and watching Father Bride a lot,
Mm,
it just shows the universality of both this movie and Terminator. Of like, we're on opposite ends of the world,
right.
totally different experiences, but the same. We came at these movies in the exact same way: sleepovers and
Exactly.
then family movie nights.
Because family bonds and friendship bonds, they're the same,
Hmm.
actually, no matter where you're at.
Especially if it involves Terminator 2 and Father of the Bride.
All right, Alex, what is your number one?
So my number one movie that shaped my love of watching films in a group is The Room from 2003. This is written and directed by Tommy Wiseau, also starring Tommy Wiseau and Greg Sestero. The IMDb plot summary: In San Francisco, an amiable banker's seemingly perfect life is turned upside down when his deceitful fiance embarks on an affair with his best friend. So, if folks haven't heard of this movie before, it's a very famous, terrible movie. It's basically an independent film by, again, written, directed, and starring Tommy Wiseau, this very interesting character from some unknown foreign country that he still doesn't really talk about. He's got some weird accent that no one can figure out. And he made this movie in San Francisco with basically like people that he knew. And it's very, very terrible. It's like a Plan 9 from Outer Space type of bad movie, or Troll 2, one of those famous, really bad movies. And for me, what I like about this movie and what it represents to me in terms of watching films with other people is bad movies, which is something I really enjoy. And in a later episode, we'll dive more into that. I love bad movies, but it's more about the experience of sharing a bad movie with somebody else, or having them be like, oh my God, this is so terrible. You have to watch this. So it almost feels kind of like a secret sometimes, like, oh, I know this thing that like no one else might know about because this movie's so bad, but it's so enjoyable and how bad it is. So let me kind of share it around, which is how I discovered this film. My roommate at the time was like, oh my God, you haven't seen The Room yet? You got to watch it. And, you know, he got a DVD and we watched it as a group with some other friends too together, because he had seen it and a couple other members of the group had. And I was like, oh my God, this is like the best thing I've ever seen in terms of how bad it is. And now I'm that person, sort of, it's like a chain letter basically. So now I'm trying to get as many of my friends over the years to watch this, and I want to watch it with them because you want to see how the other person is reacting, which is something that you really can only get that love and that experience from a group setting. Like watching this by myself, which I did for this podcast, is still fun, but it's not as enjoyable as seeing somebody else's first time of being like, what the hell is this movie? And laughing together at how ridiculous it is. I think actually the first time you saw this movie was with me, right?
Yeah. Although I don't know if you saw the whole thing. Did
yeah,
we?
you couldn't. You were like, I can't finish this, or we ran out of. I think we were trying to watch it after we saw the film The Disaster Artist, which is a dramatization of the making of this film that came out a couple of years ago. So I think we had done that, and then we're trying to back, and it got too late or something. And
right.
So I enjoyed taking this movie to you and be like, you got to watch this, and just seeing your reaction of it. So yeah, like, do you have the same relationship with bad movies in that sense, or just being able to share the experience of something you know you love with somebody else? And then what were your thoughts on this film?
Yeah. No, I know you enjoy that, and it was fun to kind of watch it with you in that sense. But I'm not a big bad movie kind of person per se, because if it's not good and I can't even watch it, then I don't want to watch it, because I would rather watch something that I actually like. That said, though, there is a specific kind of it's so bad it's good sort of thing.
Right.
But I don't know. For me, there has to be some redeeming quality, and that may not even be in the movie itself, but it could be just about the act of making it, and the belief that you have that you can actually put this together and you think it's good. There has to be something else that propels me through it. Otherwise, if it's just bad, like laughing at something gets sort of tired a little bit pretty soon for me. So that's why I'm never that into it. Although this one, I totally get it, because it's just so outlandish. In addition to being bad, it's so bizarre, because things just come at you out of left field. And I think there's almost like, I don't know, there's like a shock value in that sense, exactly. Of like, wait, definitely. What just happened? What just happened? And I think that's sort of, it's not even bad. I mean, it is bad, but it's less about that, but more about the shock value of it. And I totally see that if a bunch of us like got together and watched it together, it would be pretty fun. But as you've witnessed, like, I couldn't watch too much of this.
Right. Yeah, the joke kind of got the joke, but like the shock value of how bad this is, it gets wore thin on you pretty fast. Yeah, I mean, the thing that I think you hit the nail on the head, though, for me, and again, we'll get more into this in a future episode around why I love really bad movies. But there's a difference between a movie that was meant to be good by the filmmakers and turned out to be absolutely garbage versus what we've kind of fallen into now in the last 10 years with these, like the Sharknadoes and these movies that are purposely supposed to be bad. To me, that's not entertaining or interesting, because you're trying to make a movie that's bad, and I can see the desire and like, we're going to make this movie bad. Or like Snakes on a Plane is another example of that, or Cocaine Bear, one of the worst movies I've ever seen, was earlier this year. I love it when, like, Tommy Wiseau, who wrote and directed this, he's thinking he's making Citizen Kane.
Right.
And this
Or
actually is a
rebel without a
movie,
cause.
right? And but this movie is completely the writing's bad, the acting's bad, the directing's bad, the editing is bad. There's a whole sequence that takes place on a rooftop that they very easily could have filmed this on a real rooftop in San Francisco. There's a lot of scenes that they filmed around San Francisco. Very cheap to do that. Instead, he builds this entire fake rooftop on a set for some reason, puts a bunch of green screen around for some reason, and then recreates the skyline of San Francisco for no, like, there's literally no reason for you to ever do this. But he did all those things, and that's what makes this movie bad. But he thought it was the right thing to do. So that is where I love the bad movies, where the intention was not to make a bad movie. It was to make something they thought was good, and either their talent wasn't there, or just sometimes things don't come together and the result is terrible. And this one, the mystery behind it too, of like, who is Tommy Wiseau? Why did he do this? What is going on here? Like all of that piece, which makes this one especially unique to me. And also it was a running thing in LA too. For a while, this movie was advertised on a billboard on Highland. And I'd seen it for several years. It would just be like The Room. It was just playing in like one theater in LA for the longest time, of sort of like to the midnight crowd, like a Rocky Horror type thing, which is a famous, for folks who don't get the reference, which I guess I already made this earlier in the episode, but there's a Rocky Horror Picture Show, a movie from the 70s that is sort of a musical, like a very glam musical that became a cult classic that shows at midnight screenings all around the world, actually, where the audience goes and interacts with the film. So The Room was essentially being like Rocky Horror here in LA. And I've always been kind of curious about it, but until my friend forced me to watch it in that group setting. Again, I think that was what was so important. You don't get the joke, I think, unless there's people around you. It just really does lay bare the fact that, yeah, this movie's so bad. It's so bad and just bizarre more than bad. It's just bizarre.
It's just bizarre. And you're right. I think there's something very experiential and communal in that. And that's why this movie has kind of, gained a cult following, because the people who watched it, they watched it with their friends and other groups of people. So, but yeah, on the point of like, he thinks he's doing something good, I think there is something admirable about that.
There definitely is.
And there's something about sort of the power of movies and how seductive this act can be, that you, I don't know, watched the making of a certain movie and you said that, oh, if I ever get to do this, I'm going to make my own set.
Right.
Even though even if it makes no sense for you to do so.
Right.
That's the thing you fell in love with. That was part of your dream mood board, I suppose, that you're going to do this when you make a movie. And there's something to root for about that. And I think I need a little bit of that, to make like a bad, bizarre endeavor resonate in some way, that they actually wanted to make something good.
Right. Or it's not some sort of soulless kind of cash grab thing. Like you'll watch a Transformers movie and it's expensive, but that movie also is bad. But there's not only, maybe they intended even to make something good, but it was very clearly for the money.
Right.
And a lot of these other movies, like The Room, I think this movie was way more successful than Tommy Wiseau ever to possibly imagine. I'm sure he made a lot of more money from it than he thought, but he wasn't going into it for the money. He clearly just wanted to be a filmmaker, and he has no talent. And that's what we get. We get The Room, and it's still enjoyable, and I love watching it, but it's a different thing. I think I agree with you. I need that flavor of like, hey, this person wanted to make something good for the right reasons because they want to be a filmmaker, and they just didn't have the talent, and it just comes up with a weird mess. I mean, honestly, it's really hard for me to describe this movie to listeners who've never seen it or even heard of it. It is sort of like you have to see it to believe it.
Right.
It is something that you can't really, that plot summary is kind of what it's about, but not really. And it's some very weird drama that's overly dramatic, but it's really cheesy, and it's so awkward, and great quotable lines in it too, because of how badly they're written and delivered. The famous, "You're tearing me apart, Lisa." Right. Maybe folks have heard that before, but it's a movie I recommend you definitely see, but you find someone who already loves it and have them show it to you. That's the idea. Or go to like a midnight show where you can get those obsessive fans there too. But don't try to just rent this off Amazon and sit there alone and feel like you're going to get the real experience. You're going to be like, what the hell is this? As opposed to what the hell is this, and laughing at it as you would in a group. And that's the power of how a group can transform a movie watching experience, at least for me with this type of movie.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Also, editing, like, how is this movie cobbled together?
Oh my God.
It's like an alien made this movie.
100%.
right? Like this
100%.
is not,
Yes.
it's not coherent
Hmm. Yeah.
whatsoever.
It makes no the different, like he does establishing shots for no reason. He's shooting things where like we don't need this for the point of the story. I mean, my favorite scene I think in the movie, it's you can actually find this on YouTube if you want to get a sense of what this movie is. It's just him going to a flower shop to buy some
Oh.
flowers. It's maybe like 45 seconds, but it's the most bizarrely edited thing and acted. And there's like it's like, hey, doggy, it's watch that. And if you think that is amazing, then I definitely recommend checking out the movie. But yeah, it's such an odd, it does feel like an alien. And that's what Tommy Wiseau is also, that cult of personality around him now. Like, who was this guy? Why did he make this thing? Is the accent even real? There's all these rumors kind of flying around about his background, but it's what makes the movie interesting, you know? And then hearing that one too, and that was what my friend was telling me when I was sitting down and watching. Like, oh, I got to tell you all this stuff about this movie first. So they're able to fill you in on the backstory of this before you then see it, to kind of set the stage. And that's another thing that watching it by yourself, you really wouldn't get that that backstory, which is why it's so important to watch movies in a group. I think that's the way that they're meant to be experienced. Though again, I've seen tons of movies by myself, and you can get a lot out of it, like you said, that contemplative side of things too. But I think movies are it's a social art form.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, with that, what are some films that did not make the list for you?
Yeah, this was a good list. So a bunch of other Steve Martin movies that have become family classics, like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, which we covered on a previous episode, Pink Panther, which we also covered on a previous episode. But lately, as I've grown older, my sister's grown older, a lot of Hitchcock movies have become our family viewing.
Nice.
So Rear Window and Dial for Murder specifically. And then for Friends, I think Avengers Endgame, you were the one who set that up. Like that's, even though I'm not a superhero comic book movie person, but that movie and that whole experience will always live in my mind. And then also the first Spider-Man, the Tobey Maguire one.
Yeah. No, definitely. For me, you know, Avengers Endgame as well. I mean, I think that's the capstone of that whole experience for me that started with Phantom Menace. Also, another Spider-Man movie, but Spider-Man No Way Home, the most recent one. I just will never forget the moment when Tobey Maguire came back on screen, 2 rows in front of me, 2 guys just started hugging each other. And just, it was a very emotional moment seeing Toby come back. The whole theater erupted, and these 2 guys just looked at each other and just started hugging and just like almost crying because it was such an amazing experience. Also, a film that I saw in college called Peking Opera Blues. It's a Chinese martial arts film that is just the most wild thing you've ever seen. And having that whole film school crowd there in a packed theater really elevated that experience for me. And then RRR, which you talked about previously on the podcast, that I almost did put it in here because that movie I've seen twice in the theater, and it's just it's an experience that you cannot even again put into words. But again, great. I just love watching movies in the group. So why don't we talk a little bit about the bit of change in format we have. So like we mentioned in the beginning, we're coming back at you now weekly, starting this week. And every other week, we'll have our normal episodes like the one we just had. And the next one coming up actually is the movies that shaped our guilty pleasures, which is an episode that I'm incredibly excited about. So in between, Karan, why don't you tell the listeners what we're going to be doing going forward?
Yeah, so we started this already, which is we're going to focus on actors, actresses, filmmakers of all kinds, people who've really meant something to us and have kind of defined our movie loving experience. So we're going to pick one of these people and basically talk about them. So we did one on Tom Cruise. So the next one that we have coming up as a teaser is on Arnold Schwarzenegger. We're going to try and pair some of these kind of, I wouldn't call them deep dives, but more like just a fan letter, if you will, to, people who meant something to us. We're going to try and map them to the episodes that we're doing in our regular format, but not always. But we just felt that can't have movies meaning so much to us without the people who made them. So it sort of is a natural extension, I think, of us talking not just about the movies that shaped us, but also the people who made them shaped us.
Yeah, so we're excited to, I guess I should say, we'll be back next week for our deep dive on Arnold. Okay, well, we hope you enjoyed our discussion today. We're available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube, where you can find reviews of each of the movie we covered. And please don't forget to always rate and review us on your podcast platforms. It definitely helps other listeners find our show. And also, tell folks about it. If your friends, you like to watch movies in a group, or your family, make sure you let them know about this episode. And with that, we'll see you next week.
See you next week. Oh, hi, Mark.